You are listening to Mining Stock Education, where you'll learn from the top leaders in the natural resource sector and uncover quality mining investment opportunities.
There's really no penalties for scamming people in Canada in the mining sector. I cannot think of a single person who's done any jail time. They may get fines or a slap on the wrist or not being allowed to be a director or whatever, but it's a pretty good if you're into organized crime, get into the mining business because there's no penalties. Lots of money to be made.
Thanks for tuning in to MSE. I'm your host, Bill Powers, and in today's show, you're going to hear from returning guest, fund manager, and a resource investor with 4 decades under his belt, Warren Irwin of Rossau Asset Management. Warren, welcome back onto the show. And you most recently appeared on an excellently produced BBC podcast covering the Bre-X scam from the 90s, in which you were heavily involved. And I wanted to reach out to you, bring you back onto the show after listening to episode 2, which I would encourage all listeners to go check out. Warren is featured on that. Warren, you made $5 million on the way up on that stock, if I recall correctly, and then you shorted it on the way down. So welcome back onto the show. What's the type of feedback that you've gotten so far after having your message hit a broader audience through this new podcast?
Yeah, no, it's certainly getting international coverage on the BBC. Yeah, it's just starting to roll out, really. There's 9 episodes, and I'm in episode 2, and also in later episodes, they drag me back too for a couple things. And I found exactly like you said, it was an extremely well done podcast. And I think finally, people are starting to figure out that the Guzman's alive and well, and if he's dead now, he's died of old age, not from falling from the helicopter, right? And so it's very good. And for your listeners, the reason I even talk about the Bre-X, and write articles about the Bre-X situation is that I think it just shows. For me, it was a galvanizing force for me to learn some of the tricks of the mining industry and some of the amount of corruption in the mining industry. And that really saved my ass. Not only was I saved in Bre-X by an old timer who gave me some advice and was telling me some stories, but it's also served me very well in my entire career investing in juniors. And it was a very good learning ground. It was like an MBA of mining stocks by going through the whole Bre-X process. And so I encourage anybody who wants to learn about the mining business. I've written a 4-page article, really small, on Bre-X. So if you Google my name and Bre-X, and I think it's on CEO.ca, if you go Google those 4 items, there's a 4-page summary of Bre-X, which is really good. And if you got more time, there's a 9 episode, each episode is about half an hour long, done by the BBC. They did an extraordinarily good job. They interviewed some amazing people, like everybody from Jim Bob Moffat to Peter Monk, to the top journalist in Southeast Asia, John Macbeth. And then you had Brian Coates also, who is the CFO of Bre-X, who later went on to be very successful with the Cisco group of companies. He's a superstar CFO, but he was CFO of Bre-X, as luck would have it. And so you have a very good ethical guy who's at a company that based in Canada, but with far-flung operations he's never been to, and he talks about the stresses he was under going through that whole process. And I give it to people who stepped up and were interviewed for this podcast, because people are just opening up. Like I've never seen people open up and tell the truth and just bare their feelings and the stress and the PTSD they're under after having gone through all this.
Warren, for those that aren't familiar with Bre-X, if we could just take a step back, essentially gold was salted into the core that was sent off to the assay labs to produce higher than true results. That was like the essence of the scam, right?
Yeah, it was done in Indonesia, on the island of Borneo, in an area which is the Indonesian side, was Kalimantan. And it was basically north of a town called Samarinda is where the site was. It was very remote. And there's a group of Filipino geologists who I believe were instrumental in salting the core, basically meaning they put gold samples in the sample bag, small amounts of gold in the sample bags, went to the lab. So hence it looked as if the deposit had massive amounts of gold, and it really didn't have any.
And they did not split the core in half like most Canadian mining companies too, right? Didn't they take larger chunks of the core so that there wasn't the evidence left over if somebody wanted to double check it?
Yeah, they did skeleton core, which is basically they took a few centimeters of every every meter. They took a few centimeters and just saved that. And it's a story about incredible. It was an incredible story because the amount of human greed I saw happen in the mid-90s during the mid-90s resource boom was unlike any level of greed I've ever seen. And greed and delusionment, like on a massive scale, whereas, every day you'd wake up, Bre-X would be on the front page of the Globe and Mail and the Financial Post. Like everybody was into it. It was just unbelievable. And they talk in the podcast about this one town in Alberta where my recollection is the RBC bank manager. They don't tell you that in the podcast, but an RBC bank manager told a bunch of locals about this stock called Bre-X, and they were kind of they said, "Well, sure, I'll throw some money at it," and they got in so early they made fortunes, right? And my understanding at the time was, and again, it's not in the podcast, but that this bank manager ended up retiring and moving to New Zealand as a result of his Bre-X wins. And, I know people who have, who made money. Of my friends, I probably made, one of the bigger amounts of money. I think net, I did have 5.6 million in Bre-X stock, 1 million borrowed. So it was 4.6 million in equity. By the time I sold net of everything, I made $3.5 million, which, in the early, the mid-90s was, you could actually buy something with $3.5 million.
Is that on the way up, Warren, before you shorted it down, or that's even winnings from shorting?
One thing about shorting is you always make way, way more money on the long side than you can shorting, right? And so if you take $1 and their stock goes up 100 times, you make $100. But if you short $100 stock and it goes to zero, you'll make, if you shorted $1 worth of $100 stock and went to zero, you only made $1, right? So the short ride was actually, for me, quite fascinating because there's they talk about the chat lines in the podcast also, and I just actually called up the chat line that was used for Bre-X, and believe it or not, after almost 30 years, it is still online. So any guys who really want to get into human psychology and do a study of greed should check out siliconinvestor.com and then Google it. The exact thread that it's on is under global mining and energy, gold mining and energy. It's Bre-X, Indonesia, Ashanti Goldfields, strong companies. And, I don't think it's a big secret. My moniker at the time, I guess almost 30 years ago, was Big Dude. And there are a ton of other people. So if you go back to like any of the key points, like when Guzman fell from the helicopter, just go back and just watch the chat sessions and you're stepping back in time almost 30 years. See, well, what happens and how did investors react, and who are the promoters and who are the naysayers, and how much abuse did the people who, like myself, took as a result of, trying to convince people or trying to save people from themselves. Yet I couldn't say it was a fraud because I was already at the time receiving death threats, but pretty serious and ominous threats from people who had either were involved in the scam, perhaps weren't involved in the scam and just had so much money of their own money and their future stake in Bre-X that they just really did not like the fact that I was trying to enlighten people as to what was really going on, right?
And you only tried to enlighten after somebody kind of threw cold water in your face, though. Perhaps share that aspect of the story. Yeah.
And, people ask me, Warren, why don't you shut up about Bre-X? And why do you keep out all these podcasts, trying to keep the story alive and telling people the story and showing all your tricks and traps and how you got... And all the things you learned from Bre-X, is why are you spending all this time doing this? And it's because of one person. It was Dale Hendrick, and he's passed away. And But he was an old mining guy. When I came back from the Bre-X trip, and I ran into him in an elevator of all things, and we started a conversation up. I was reading the Financial Post, which had a big color page, front page on Bre-X, and I said, we just chatting with this old guy. I didn't know him. He was lived in my condo building. I said, oh yeah, I was just in Indonesia looking at this project. And he said, you were? He says, we have to chat. And I got to know him extremely well, and he was a really interesting guy. And he just explained to me why he believed Bre-X was a complete and total fraud. And this was in the, back right after I came back from the site. So, I was still long, close to $5.6 million worth of stock as a 31-year-old or whatever, and 32-year-old. And, you can imagine how I felt about that. And I had my whole financial situation riding on Bre-X. So I had a good lunch with him, and he explained 30 reasons why Bre-X was a fraud, and I explained 30 reasons why each of those points was incorrect, and there was a plausible answer to every single one. But when I did leave the lunch, I said, I had two sides. Suspicions he was working for a large mining company, and you'll see in the podcast the big battle for Bre-X by the big mining companies, and I was concerned he was working for a big mining company trying to spread disinformation. But what did concern me quite a bit was that there were indeed 30 issues that he brought up. Despite having 30 answers to it, it just didn't sit well with me. So I started at that point. I'd been somewhat skeptical when I was doing due diligence when I was on site. I was looking around for things. Are the locals fooled? Who's doing the drillers? Are the drillers fooled? What are the people like on site? And there's a lot of Canadian geologists there, and there was Australian drillers, and all the local Dayak people were building homes around the site. So everybody was all in. Everybody was pretty fooled. And you still had BMO, which was the biggest promoter of the stock, they had a respected analyst there who's long. When I was on site, I was there with like analysts from JP Morgan and others, like the creme of the world were there. And but I did see the level of due diligence they did, which was, in my opinion, very little. They were more interested in sucking up to the management team to try and get their firms involved in the next underwriting, or perhaps as advisors for the sale of Bre-X or something like that. So they were more keen on sucking up, really, on the trip rather than doing due diligence. When I was there, I had no benefit to suck up, so I just was looking around asking questions.
And
right?
Warren, you weren't even invited, and you revealed that in the podcast too, right? You were so insistent that you flew yourself out there. They said, nope, you're not going to site on the helicopter, but you were determined. You said, I'm getting to site. Yeah,
that's a bit of a story in itself. Fortunately, right after MBA school, I'd ignore, again, I'm a contrarian to, I guess, people, I just don't believe a lot of the BS out there in the world, right? So when I graduated, the Berlin Wall was coming down, and everybody said, Russia's going to open up. It'll be 3 enterprises, blah, blah, blah. And I said, this is baloney. That'll never happen. They're all commies. They're not going to change. I'm going to go to Southeast Asia where, they're hardworking, industrious, entrepreneurial people. So I spent a ton of time there, including Indonesia, where I was really lucky to have a professor from MBA school who was teaching down at the school, from my MBA school, who was teaching down in Jakarta at the business school there. And he lent me his car and driver for the day, which was really nice of him. And I learned a lot about Indonesia. And then I went across the entire island of Java, and I went to Bali. I didn't go to Kalimantan back, in 91. But so when I came back to Canada, I had a very unique insight into Indonesia, which at the time in 91, like how many Canadians have ever been to Indonesia, let alone I think I spent like 3 weeks or a month there. So I had a very unique sense of that place. And then, so when the discovery was made, right, I always had a specific interest in it because I knew there was lots of money being made in Indonesia. And I'd already valued a gold company for a friend of mine. And so I got into it. And then when I wanted to go on the tour, I phoned up the office, like you said, and they said, sorry, Warren, there's no room in the helicopters. It's all booked up. It was probably the most sought after mining tour ever in the world. Like Bre-X, the world's biggest gold discovery, and getting on a mining tour of it. Like you could imagine, everybody's clawing at each other to get on that tour. So I said, well, I jumped on a plane and flew to Jakarta, which, I had no qualms about doing. I said, and then sat in front of the office manager, who, my recollection, his name was Greg, and took him out for, dinner maybe. It'd be tougher for him to say no if he knew I flew all the way from Canada. And you can't say, well, you can't go on site. But he said, Warren, you can't go on site. The helicopters are all full. And then he said, well, but, you should probably go to Borneo or to Kalimantan, to a town called Balikpapan, which is a super cool place. So because John Felderhoff and Mike de Guzman, the head of geology, the key geologists, were giving a presentation. So I jumped on a plane. I flew, I don't know how many hours to Kalimantan, to Balikpapan, the town, without any permission to go on site. Then I asked John and Mike, and I said, hey, any room on the helicopters to get on site? They go, nope. So, I went out drinking beers with them and stuff the night before. I saw the presentation. The next morning I woke up, John and Mike, is there any room in the helicopters? And he said, Warren, as luck would have it, one of the guys lost his passport in Hong Kong, and he had to go until he was sent home. So there's one spot on one of the Hueys going in. So I said, sign me up. So I'm, 6'6", and I got jammed into this, one of the side seats in the Huey, and flew over the, second growth jungle all the way into Samarinda initially. Then we fueled up and flew made the last hop into the site. So that was pretty cool.
And Warren, what does that speak about your tenacity with due diligence? Because what you just described there, like very few retail or resource, even sophisticated resource investors will do what you just did.
Yeah. Well, one other point I didn't mention is that I had a plan B, right? My plan B was I was going to pay a bunch of guys to take me up on a speedboat up the Mahakam River and get there by riverboat, and then buy a motorcycle and drive the 30 kilometers or so into site from the probably Lower Duri or one of the little towns along the river. So I had the plan B all set up, and I was going to just I was going to take the riverboat up as fast as we could, get up to the little port, little dock up there at Lower Duri.
And what was your motive? Were you skeptical at this point, or were you just wanting to verify your investment thesis?
Well, yeah, I had 5. We're talking. I'm a punk kid, right out of MBA school. Wasn't that long ago. I was rolling quarters to buy food, right? So, and now I'm sitting on $5.6 million. So I'm going, yeah, I'm going to do anything, right? And, so that's what I did. I said, no stops. I'm all in. I'm going to just do everything I possibly can to learn as much as I can. And I also ran up, $1,500 a month phone bills too. Like it was, I was on the phone every night. And, it was funny. On the phone situation, there were so many phone calls going between Canada and Indonesia. You sometimes had to sit there and call a dozen times before you could even get a circuit that'll get you through, because all the circuits are completely jammed. And, that was back in the day when, to call Indonesia was quite expensive. And so I was just all in.
After that due diligence trip, were you more convinced that you should stay in the stock at that point?
No, I think it was neutral. I had some concerns. Like looking back, I was concerned enough that I asked John Felderhoff, who was the head of exploration, I said, John, when are you going to twin the holes? So you don't ask that unless you've got some level of, you want to check a few things out. And other things I did too, like it was just, there were a couple things that just didn't sit right with me when I was there. But, I came back generally feeling okay. And, but as time went on, and people started falling from helicopters and stuff like that, you remember the smallest details. For instance, I knew Mike didn't fall from the helicopter immediately because I'd actually ridden in the Alouette 3 when I was on site, and, it has car doors in the front. So when you're zipping along in the helicopter, you can't open those doors. And in the back, it's a big sliding door, and those aren't easy doors to open while you're in flight. And if you do open them, it destabilizes the aircraft considerably. So, the original thing when Mike fell from the helicopter, people said, well, Warren, he was hopping from drill site to drill site in the helicopter. He didn't belt himself in. That's probably how he fell out. But no, I phoned the office and said, well, Where did he fall out? They told me it was between the last stop, Samarinda, and the site. And I knew that the pre-flight inspection, because, I was on it, like things as stupid as a pre-flight inspection that you never think about when you're on a site. You come back home and you go, I know how thorough the pre-flight inspection was. Nobody falls from a helicopter, right? So something was very wrong. So these things. And so those little details that you never think about while you're on site, but you just keep your eyes and ears open, they come back to really help you out a lot at a later time,
And Warren, you said at the outset of our call today that the Guzman is either still alive or died by natural causes. And, people might challenge you on that because that's not the mainstream narrative on this story, but maybe delve into why you believe that.
It's so obvious, right? Like I was following as the old story goes, I was like on these guys like a fat kid on a Smartie, right? Like I was just full court pressing on them. And so that meant, I was all around the PDAC, and I'd run into Mike de Guzman with his, Filipino geologists, and they were just loaded up with hookers like crazy. Like we're talking the nights prior to him flying back to Indonesia, right? So I knew he was partying like there was no tomorrow. And there's actually some former strippers who've gone back and, been interviewed by some of these people following Bre-X about what happened. And Mike was partying up like crazy. The guy was very, very smart. He orchestrated the finest scam in the mining business. And, Graham Farquharson, who was one of the mining guys who blew the cover on this and put the final nail in Bre-X coffin. He said it's the finest mineral scam he's ever seen in his career, right? And I don't think I've seen one as good since. So she orchestrated the finest scam in the mining business. And then are you saying you're going to try and tell me that he didn't have an exit plan, right? The guy's really smart, right? So he had the exit plan. So the exit plan was his death and a fake body thrown in. And, they did the autopsies. They talk about the BBC. They talked to some specific doctors that did autopsies. The autopsies are like, for instance, the body looked as if it had been rotting for 2 weeks, yet they found the body 3 days after it fell from the helicopter. Yet it had the amount of decomposition from a couple of weeks, right? So, and there's a whole bunch of things. It gets into it in the BBC podcast in quite a bit of detail. And with respect to like Mike, the biggest one is I was in touch with, I had a very close relationship with a really amazing guy. His name was John Macbeth, and he was based in Indonesia. He worked for the Far Eastern Economic Review, and he and I would talk a lot. He would tell me what was going on in Indonesia, and I would feed him up all the stories from Canada. And it was a very good relationship, and that we were information sharing quite a bit. And he's interviewed in the BBC broadcast. Fortunately, they got him before he passed away. He just passed away in December, unfortunately. But they had interviewed him last year, just prior to that. So I'm so glad that he was able to share his thoughts. He's a very brilliant man. And so he and I, we collaborated, and he told me a story because we were friends by that point, and because we'd spent so much time together. After the scam blew up, he told me a story about how we all knew that Mike de Guzman had 4 wives, right? That all came out when he disappeared. But there was a story about his one wife who lived in Samarinda. I believe her name was Jeannie. And I think initially she got 2 wire transfers from Citibank Brazil. One was for $250,000 and one was for $25,000. And if you knew, at the time, almost 30 years ago, to live in Indonesia, you give me $10 a day and I'd be living like a king in Samarinda, right? So to get $275,000 shipped to you 30 years ago, and you're like, it's a ton of money. And John also told me that Mike de Guzman phoned the house and spoke with Jeannie, his wife's cleaning lady, who was a very religious woman, and thought she was speaking with a ghost and nearly had a seizure sort of thing, right? So, and then there was faxes going back and forth with signatures of Mike de Guzman on them and stuff. So that's one situation, right? So then what happened is there's lots of other information I've got that led me to believe Mike was still alive and kicking. But then what happened is when the movie Gold came out, which in my opinion was a kind of a decent movie, but in no ways was anywhere near the truth. When that came out, I said, shit, I got to set the record straight on what really happened here. So that's when I wrote my 4-page article. And then I started talking to some friends about it, and I'd ship the article off to them. And they say, well, Warren, I know a guy who I was talking to based in Seattle, who's, close to the Filipino mafia, and he had lunch with Mike de Guzman. He told me Mike's done a lot of plastic surgery, but Mike's alive. Then I spoke with another buddy of mine. Again, this whole movie release, roughly on the 25th anniversary of Bre-X. Another buddy of mine told me, Warren, I was in Manila having lunch with a bunch of geos one day, and lunch or dinner, I forget, it might have been dinner. And this Filipino guy walks into the restaurant and then walks out and leaves. And as he's leaving, all the geologists at the table stood up, gave him a standing ovation. My buddy goes, who is that? I said, well, that was Mike de Guzman. Like, we're talking within a week or so after he was allegedly killed or dead. So it shows you a number of things, which is basically, it shows you the level, and I talk about this a little bit in the podcast about how, the mining industry, the juniors were complicit. There were a number of people who knew this was a fraud and did not... Can you
name the number? Was it 15 people that were on the inside, Warren, or how many were involved?
Were involved in the scam? That
knew it was a scam, yet went along with it and profited from it. Like, what was the totality of the cartel that organized this? And,
Okay, well, this is just me speaking. Mike de Guzman, I believe, was a ringleader. I believe Felderhoff knew. And the Filipino geologists who worked with Mike, some or all were involved in it, and I think it's clear. I think in some of the research I've done in the past of Cesar Puspus, which was one of his geos, was instrumental, was actually the salter himself. But what I meant by other people involved in the scam was that, a lot of the Australians who were much closer to Indonesia than Canada, they knew that, Felderhoff didn't have a great reputation, and they knew that people had looked at that property before and done tons of work on it. Nothing ever was found. And, Dale Hendrick told me that he knew the people who had the project in the central zone, which is the original zone, who had left the core in the jungle. And he said, well, we assayed all that core. There's nothing there. And any core that was left in the jungle, these guys come in and ship that into the lab and say, well, it has gold in it. Well, it didn't have gold in it. So they knew right from the beginning, the very start of this thing, that it was complete baloney. But, even talking to Dale, I remember when I had lunch with him, I said, Dale, so obviously, you think this is a fraud, so obviously you're short it. He goes, no, I'm not short it. I'm long it. You go, why? He goes, this is going way higher before people find out it's a scam. And, when you think about it, like, I knew people who had property on strike with Bre-X, right? I believe the company's name was Indomin, right? And these guys, to give you a sense of it, they had not drilled a single drill hole in their project, and I don't know why, and I think I know why, because they did. I'm sure they did all their blagging and their stream sediment samplings. They found there's no friggin' gold in any of the streams, so we have no idea where to even put a drill. So with no drill holes, they had a $400 million market cap, right? 30 years ago, $400 million market cap, just as an area play on strike with Bre-X, right? That shows you how crazy things were. And during the 90s too, the greed machine was really going. If you had a property, a management team, and a listing, you had 100 million market cap if you were a gold explorer at the time. Just to show you how crazy things were. So everybody was benefiting. Like all these juniors, It's kind of like the last uranium boom, right? Where there was like 500 juniors that all went to zero, or almost all went to zero. All these juniors, there was like hundreds and hundreds of juniors that, of course, all went to zero. But these CEOs were just raking in tons of money. They were raising tens of millions of dollars and then just vaporizing it, because a lot of them, they knew Bre-X was a fraud, and they just basically said, well, we'll just, this.
So were the majors complicit? In your opinion, were the majors complicit?
No, the majors were fooled. And you'll see it in the BBC, because they talked to, let's say, Jim Bob Moffat, who was head of Freeport at the time. And he talks about how he was very, very candid, to his credit, very candid about how he felt all the way through. And they have interviews also with Peter Monk, head of Barrick. And Peter Monk was pulling a lot of really shady stuff. And they go into that too, about how he was trying to manipulate the situation to his benefit using underhanded techniques. But these guys had all bought into it. And also Placer Dome was there, and I believe Teck was there. So this is what kind of played with my head, right? I'm the time, let's say, a 31-year-old kid. So I'm 31 years old, and I'm thinking this thing's a fraud, yet Teck is trying to get it. Placer Dome is trying to get it. Barrick is trying to get it. Freeport's trying to get it. Some of the biggest and most successful mining companies in the world at the time are all trying to get this project in any way they can. Yet I'm little punk kid right out of MBA school with saying, this is a fraud. Like, how come you big dumb mining companies don't know it's a fraud? And they didn't. And what's interesting, you'll see in the BBC process how long it took them actually to figure out it was a fraud. And had Barrick been successful, it was they would have been totally bagged, right? Or any of the ones been totally bagged. And
what was the fact, the prolonging of the twinning of the holes? So they gave these skeleton core, so there wasn't the evidence left over. Then they were going to drill alongside where they previously drilled to verify there was mineralization there. They kept prolonging that. Did that factor?
They never did it.
They never did it for obvious reasons.
That scared the crap out of me. Yeah, they never did it, because John Felderhoff personally told me, Warren, we're going to twin the holes in the fall. And fall came and went. No twinning of the holes, right? And back to the whole skeletons core thing. And then there was, we get into the BBC, they get into more detail than I can about how the building with all these little skeleton cores, these little pieces of core left over, burned down. So as soon as you burn it down, the core is still left, but all the records as to where each piece of core came from was no longer there. Yeah, so it was quite an episode, and it was really the guys who actually did twin the holes were Freeport when they came in, and their head geologist came in and they twinned the holes, and you could imagine you're fighting like hell for this project. You're going to have I think Freeport had we're going to have a 15% interest in it, along with the Indonesian government, and then Bre-X would have a tag end also, and you're fighting for this. So it's on the world stage, the hottest story in the entire world in the mining sector. And then you drill these holes, you throw them in the assay lab, and they come back blank. So, oh boy.
So Warren, the Bre-X scam produced the reform in Canadian mining, where you have the NI 43-101 requirements, and you have to attest to its truthfulness and all of these things that are supposed to give investors like us more assurance. However, there is kind of like a not full confidence from investors when it comes to the regulators enforcing the rules and so forth. Could you provide some commentary here? Because you see the Bridgemark scam of whatever it's been 5 years ago, and those guys seemingly just get a slap on the wrist for running a huge scam. And it doesn't lead to giving confidence to investors.
Yeah, well, there's really no penalties for scamming people in Canada in the mining sector. I cannot think of a single person who's done any jail time. They may get fines or a slap on the wrist or not being allowed to be a director or whatever, but it's a pretty good, if you're into organized crime, get into the mining business, because there's no penalties, lots of money to be made, and that's why the only people I see nailing these guys are any Vancouver promoters that are stupid enough to have anything to do with the U.S., because the U.S. will just clobber you, because they're a serious securities commission, right? And they'll get you. Like I know I know some people right now under investigation, and boy, I would not be a happy camper if I was under investigation by the U.S. because they're seriously tough individuals and they really go for you.
And that's listed on one of the bigger boards, not the OTC. If the company is domiciled in the U.S. and listed on a major exchange in the U.S.
If you are a Canadian promoter and you take advantage of U.S. investors, you're in trouble, right? You just don't want to be specifically going after them and pump and dumps or whatever. And come to think of it, I know a few pump and dumpers who got off with slaps on the wrist, but there's some guys that they're really going after. So we'll see what happens. But in the U.S., they actually go after people. In Canada, they're pretty. The problem we have too, right, is because we have a provincial securities commission rather than a national securities commission, and I know that. Flaherty, one of our former finance ministers, was trying to get that done. It would make a ton of sense, but it hasn't been done. And now everything's, can you believe a little province like British Columbia has its own securities commission? It's pretty nutty. We should have a national securities commission. But the issue we have with that is no matter what we do, Quebec will always want its own securities commission. Like everybody wants to balkanize our security regulations, which means that there's
is it easier to get around, skirt around the rules?
I would think so. Yeah, I would think so, because I've never seen anybody prosecuted for any of the bad stuff I've seen out in Bay Street.
And is there peer pressure to do what's right in the Canadian mining industry? Executive to executive, geologist to geologist, in your experience?
Well, no, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. Like, for instance, if I say anything about anybody acting unethically, I just get destroyed, right? And no different than when I was calling Bre-X a fraud, man. Like, everybody was against me, and that's a problem, right? Like, for instance, you may have been aware of a tweet I did back in February, right, when I called out the Canadian government and what they were going to do to poor the Ecuadorian copper company, and I came out and said, well, this is what they're going to do. It's bad for Canadian mining. Man, the abuse I took for that, and sure enough, I don't like to be redeemed for it, but, exactly what I said was happening in February actually did indeed happen. But I'll tell you, back in February, when I mentioned that, the Canadian government wasn't going to approve Solaris's investment by Sijin Mining, people lost their shit on me, frankly. And so anytime anybody tries to point anything out that's wrong, you just get shit on. I'll give you another example. I remember when in the early days of NexGen, I was really trying to get people interested in NexGen. I was probably their biggest spokesperson or of the company. NexGen, I thought was tremendous. I did my own ore model. It was going to be a huge winner. And, people were pushing at the time fission uranium. And, as soon as I said, well, fission isn't going to work for this reason or that reason. And the reason was that at the time, again, this was about, 8 or 9 years ago, I said, there's no way it's going to be economic the way they're going to mine it, which is they're going to do a stupid dike in the middle of a lake, mining high-grade open-pit uranium in the middle of a lake. I was going, yeah, fisheries is going to love that. And I said, the structure of your pit is the least efficient for any dike structure. And I knew a little bit about dikes because, I've been up to the diamond mines in the Arctic with Diavik and their A154 South dike. And I saw how much work it is to, first of all, get down to the bedrock or some solid ground and then build a dike up from there and then dewater the dike. But this was not, the A154 South is kind of like right on the side of a lake, not in the middle of a lake like fission was expected. So I would just try to point that out to people, and they were just losing their shit on me, frankly. And they were dumping all over NexGen and just all over me about fission. And sure enough, fission finally figured that one out. They realized they'd have to mine it from underground, but then as soon as you mine from underground, you lose a lot of resources because you need a crown pillar, right? You need that distance between the bottom of the lake and your mine. So they had to sterilize a lot of their resources. And, so I was beat up pretty badly on that one and drummed off some sites by some people. So people really don't like bad news in the mining sector. And so it's whenever you say anything about it, it's just, they're all over you.
What's your current opinion of NexGen?
I'm out of NexGen now. I was a very, very strong supporter. I knew management right from the beginning, almost 10 years ago. And I remember what it was like when they first started and how they were, humble, hardworking, keen to set the world on fire and keen to show the world what they had. And I think they've lost their way here now. And it's not, I know way more than I could ever say. But, publicly available, we all know that, they haven't got their permit to build the mine yet. And so they haven't started building the mine yet. They're sponsoring a Formula One team, right? So they've lost the plot, right? They're sponsoring the Vancouver Canucks. They're doing a lot of things which, frankly, show to me they've lost their way. The positives on it, though, is no matter what they do and how they could screw it up, there's a hell of a deposit there, but you can't underestimate how much effort it's not easy to build a mine, let alone an underground high-grade uranium mine. It's to be taken seriously, and when you're distracted by other things and spending money, your shareholders' money, on things that, frankly, I don't think they should be spending their money on, it distracts you from the real job, because NexGen's job here is not to do whatever they're doing, and executive compensation, options, and it goes on. Because, usually with any of these things, the stuff you and I know is obviously the tip of the iceberg. I would feel better if they just stopped with the nonsense, took the mine build very seriously, and stay focused on the mine build, and stayed away from the F1. But
Warren, you're a public proponent of nuclear energy, but are you in any nuclear mining uranium mining stocks right now?
I have two investments left. Uranium's run from, again, back when I was invested in NexGen at $17 uranium, everybody thought I was an idiot. Uranium's not going anywhere, blah, blah, blah. Here we are, more than 4 times the value. And now everybody's a bull after it's already run 4 times, right? And again, I got beat up after my Vancouver Resource Conference last year. I spoke about uranium to say, I'm bullish on uranium. But for the Super Bulls, as you know, some of the Super Bulls, that wasn't good enough. Warren Irwin had to be super bullish on uranium. And I said, no, I'm not. I said, I'm not super bullish on uranium. I'm bullish on it. I think nuclear power has a great future. I was invested in NexGen, which I thought was a tremendous company. And, I was around the last uranium cycle, and I saw what happened there. So I'm not about to get carried away. And then I also told people how to spot the top of the uranium market, and a lot of people didn't like that. And there are a lot of uranium bulls at Bre-X, right? So here we are, a year and a half later. Oh yeah, I guess we're not at $200 uranium, are we, kids? We're kind of like at 90, which is kind of up. I think it was like 55, 60 when I said, yeah. So it's kind of performed the way I kind of said it would. It wasn't going to spike like it did back in 2006, 2007. But yeah, the thing that concerns me, let's say, about the uranium market, I just have to say these things before I want to get into ones that I have an interest in. But, despite what anybody says, demand growth for uranium consumption is virtually non-existent. There's 450 reactors out there. China's building, let's say, 50, bringing the commission over the next 5 years. It's 10 a year. But that 450 is a very, very old inventory of reactors, and they're being decommissioned. So you've got these new reactors coming in, yet the older ones are being decommissioned. A lot of these reactors are built in the 70s, right? So they're getting very old. And some of them are having their lives extended, but a lot of them are being shut down. And so on the demand side, I don't share anybody's view on this tremendous demand growth because we've already got a big install base that's getting pretty old and we're not building reactors fast enough, right? That may change. The other concern I have is that $90 uranium, pretty much every project in the entire world that I've seen in uranium is economic at these levels. So if it stays at $90 for the next 3 or 4 years, whatever, a lot of these should be a lot of stuff happening and a lot of product eventually coming at us. The bull case is though that short term there's a short term crunch here in that because of years of lack of investment in the uranium space, there's just not the production to meet current demand, and that gap has been made up by secondary supply that's been fed into the market by holders. So yeah, there you go. There's my case and there's the bull case. The other thing on my side too is you know, we're at $90 a pound, and that's despite Sprott Uranium Trust and Yellowcake and all these other hedge funds buying all this spot uranium at lodging it with ConverDyn. Like, there's a lot of speculative money into spot uranium, and like we're talking like well, you take a look, let's say 100 million pounds times almost, you know, $90 a pound, right? We're talking significant amounts of money is being thrown at spot uranium. And the best they could do and try and manipulate the price of uranium is to get it to $90. Not very impressive. So secondary supply is coming from somewhere, something's happening. But, you know, again, the bulls would say, well, Warren, it's not the secondary supply. The nuclear utilities are just drawing down their inventory, waiting for the price to subside a bit. So who knows what the truth is? But all I know is, to kind of summarize it, uranium's got up 4 times. You know, if it goes from $90 to even 200, well, it's gonna be a double. Well, whoop-de-doo, right? It's already, everything's factoring in a pretty strong uranium market, and so that's why I'm not super duper bullish on uranium. But there is just one uranium company I'm into. I'm not really a super big fan of dropping names, but it's I guess you want me to drop a name?
Go for it. And,
all right,
and
so,
say it whether you're shorting NexGen, because I can already hear in my head objections. Well, Warren now has gone short on NexGen if he's talking like this publicly.
No, I'm not involved in NexGen at all. And the reason I would never short NexGen is because the deposit is too good. It's a very top quality deposit in a great jurisdiction. You know, there is a lot of speculative money in it. That would be a negative. But, you know, you never know where these guys could jam this spot market up. You know, who knows? Make to jam it to 150 and NexGen will go to 15, 20 bucks. Who knows? So I don't think NexGen's a short in here, frankly. I think in a few years' time, if this uranium rally doesn't continue to rock and roll, I think a lot of the fast money in NexGen will leave it. And if the price of uranium starts to come off a bit, I think there'll be some selling. But are you going to make big money on something? No. I like terminal shorts, meaning stocks that go to zero, right? That's why I like shorting Bre-X, because Bre-X went to zero. NexGen is going to keep going, right? So there's that. And, you know, whether NexGen's worth 10 bucks, 20 bucks, 30 bucks, 15 bucks, 5 bucks, you know, who knows? And who knows where the price of uranium will be. All I know is I do have concerns when every project I know in the world is kind of economic at 90 bucks and we're at 90 bucks. So that's usually not a good indication. Now, the one that does interest me quite a bit is District Metals. And it has a NexGen tie to it too. It's run by the former head of exploration for NexGen. So he has some credibility in the uranium space. But what's fascinating about it is he's managed to get control of the world's largest undeveloped uranium deposit in Sweden. And it looks like Sweden's going to this year lift the moratorium on uranium mining. I've also heard that you know, Sweden really wants to get into being self-sufficient in uranium for their own reactors. So that will entail not only uranium mining but also enrichment within Sweden. They're fiercely independent people, and what's interesting about it too is it's in a form of a black shale, which means it'll be an open pit, low grade, which is reasonably easy to mine. The tricky part of it will be the metallurgy, but there are some big mining companies that are nailing this metallurgy, right?
What about Colonial Coal? Are you still in that stock?
Yeah, I still own that. Yep. The big news there is Citibank now is representing them, and Citibank are pretty serious players in the met coal field. And my understanding is they were approached by Citibank. So Citibank, they don't waste their time on deals that are not going to happen, right? So we'll see if they're able to put the puck in the net here over the next year or so, maybe sooner. But they fingers crossed. It's a high quality deposit. Met coal prices are pretty strong. Yeah. And then while we're getting into some other names too, I'm involved in a nickel play in Botswana with premium nickel. That's an extraordinary nickel deposit. Near term, I'd like to see them have some of their financing issues settled, whether it be bringing in a big strategic investor or do a large financing with some very large institutions just to put them on a strong financial footing going forward. And but once they do that, I know, I'm pretty into nickel geophysics. They have an extraordinary target between two, like basically they've got a nickel ore going like this and nickel ore going like this, and there's this gap zone of about almost 3 kilometers that has never been drilled, and it's lighting up on the geophysics extraordinarily well. And downhole EM geophysics works really, really well in nickel. So I'm pretty confident to say that I'm 90% sure they're going to find a monstrous amount of nickel between those two areas. So as a person who watched the Voisey's Bay saga turn out, where it was over a $4 billion US acquisition price 30 years ago, to have a company like Premium Nickel trading as cheaply as it is pretty extraordinary. And then I'm also involved in some copper projects in South America, one of them being Sol Gold. And Sol Gold, they've got one of the top 5 undeveloped projects in the world. And I think that'll get sold over the next year also. Copper's heating up. And so there'll be some corporate transactions happening here, I believe, as people pick off some of these already drilled out discoveries.
And Warren, a lot of these names you're naming, like NexGen, you were in that for how many years? I want to point this out to.
Oh yeah.
This says the time frame, like gold went up, we know, in the last couple of weeks, and then it dropped off for a few days. And I saw all the world is collapsing, perspective from retail mining investors. But you've been in these stocks for like a decade before you sell, right? Or close to it.
Yeah. I think NexGen was 9 years. I think it was 2003 or 2004. I think it was 2004. I was on my first trip up there. And, NexGen, extraordinary situation. And you don't come along those too often. It's one of my biggest money-making situations in my career. And you're in Colonial Coal for how many years now at this point? Oh yeah, it's probably a 7 or 8 year one. I'm also in Sol Gold for at least 8 years, I think. And Premium Nickel, I've been in it for at least 3 or 4 years. So, these are grinded out stories. But it's kind of the approach I take.
You have to with a larger investment too, right? Running a fund and you put in millions of dollars. It's not like you can just liquidate it easily.
Yeah, that's part of it. But sometimes, frankly, I'm involved also in some oil names, and I have 2 oil companies in Africa that I'm a big investor in, and we've been grinding away in both those for 7 or 8 years. And both of those are coming to a conclusion here shortly too. So, it's almost like, I know there's a lot of fast money out there in the retail world, but sometimes these names, it takes a lot of years to finally unfold to make the kind of dough you need, and you got to be patient over a multi-year period. And like I was with NexGen, like, man. I watched that. So you saw what happened in 2020. NexGen dropped from $6 or something, or $5 down to like 80 cents. Like And it was back up through $8 within 9 months of that, right? So the volatility can be quite extraordinary, and people think that, the stock's going to zero. But if you invest in good quality names, like NexGen, and others, they don't go to zero. They just get pounded down with the rest of the market. And that's really when you like to pick them up, right? When everybody's selling in a big panic and they think the end of the world's coming. And that's where it's good to have a bit of cash around to pick up some of those names.
Warren, as we conclude, for retail investors in particular, as they're listening to this conversation, I want to point out that you told me when we first did our interview in March of 2018 at PDAC and talking about the Bre-X scam for this show, you told me, Bill, you won't even know what you're doing for until you've been at this for 10 years. Now, you've been at this for 4 decades, and you've referenced, like, there's things I know that I can't say. You've referenced people and that have brought you intelligence to warn you or to bring you a deal. What would you like to share with listeners as they're consuming you and I talking over the internet? If they want to be successful in the resource sector, especially junior resource stocks, what should they know?
Yeah, well, if you think you know it all, you're an idiot. Like I said, I've been on Bay Street since '86, investing in junior mining for, well over 3 decades. So I'm learning every day. There's new tricks and traps and coming up every day. But then again, you see other things which repeat themselves, where you'll have people here now doing the same things with, let's say, uranium that I've seen happen 20 times before, whether it be with cobalt, whether it be with uranium the previous cycle, whether it be with gold in the 90s, whether it be with the nickel cycle when nickel hit $30 some years ago. Cycles just keep repeating themselves. So I could benefit from my knowledge from multiple cycles. And the important thing, I think, for the retail investor is just check your ego at the door. You can be wrong. Learn as much as you can from some sharp people. There's lots of guys that are generous with their time. Like, Rick Rule's got tons of great podcasts out there. He's a sharp man. He'll tell you tons and tons of stories, which are better to learn from Rick's experience than learning yourself. I'll try and share as many stories as I can to help with the knowledge, but you never stop learning. It's incredible. New stuff happens every year, and things keep changing and things keep moving, and you got to stay on top, and don't let your ego get too crazy, because when you do that, you're dead.
And I remember you told me also on a different show many years ago, you said, Bill, when I feel too smart on my mining investments, I sell and I put it into real estate. Right?
Hey, man, that has saved my ass so many times, Bill. And that would be a good lesson for retail too. If you ever think mining investing is easy and you're super smart, take something off the table, invest in something less risky like real estate. You'll be happy you did.
Excellent advice, and we'll leave it there. To check out Warren's podcast and how he's featured on the BBC Gold podcast, I'll link to that below. I'll also put a link to the article that Warren referenced that he wrote back in 2016 on CEO.ca, and you can hear him write about Guzman and his experience with Bre-X. And furthermore, my March 2018 podcast with Warren about Bre-X, I'm going to link to that below as well. Warren, you gave me about an hour of your day, so I really appreciate you sharing with me and my audience today. Thank you for coming on the show.
No, thanks for having me, Bill. Cheers.